Hi, this is RN Bhaskar from Bhaskar Ki Business Baatein, and this time we're going to have an interview. And for the interview, for the conversation that we have today, we have an amazing person, Manish Chokhani, an old friend, but a wizard of the markets, a legend in his own right, and someone we always look up to when it comes to understanding the markets and global economy. Manish, it's wonderful having you with us. And I'm going to learn from you, as usual, something or the other that I can.
Bhaskar, you're too kind. It's been so long when you used to edit the Financial Express, and I was learning everything from you, and I'm hoping to get that back today as well.
No, today I'm going to learn from you. Today you're the person who's speaking, I'm going to learn. Okay, Manish, I wanted to speak to you because of several reasons. And we're going to do some other interviews with you. But basically, I want to understand from you, how do you see the world today? The world is more fraught today than it was in the last 100 years. Even the world wars were not as traumatic as the current times can be. But your view.
Well, it's hard to state that the world wars were not so traumatic, but you're right that the old orders are breaking down.
Yes.
That the post-World War II construct of the world, which was really built by the West and controlled by the United States, is now coming apart at its seams.
Okay.
The structure still was based on the old colonial style where the resources came from the rest of the world and the technology and the brands and the IP rested in the West.
Okay.
And effectively, they were then, pulling in resources from whether it's Asia or Africa or Russia or China or wherever, producing goods and then selling it back over here.
Yes.
What happened over the last 30, 40 years, of course, as countries rose, so Japan, for example, famously then started creating its own products and IP and so on, and exporting finished goods back to the West. That gave a rise to a new model, which I think the Chinese have followed very well. And they've become the manufacturing powerhouse of the world.
Yes.
And they are shipping goods back to the West. And they've climbed up the value chain in terms of producing, high quality products, including the best EV cars. On robotics, they're ahead, on AI and so on and so forth. So if that model holds out, then there's a rebalancing of the world overdue for some time. And it was held about in the 2000s decade when the famous acronym of BRICS was coined.
Yes.
That Brazil, Russia, India, China will lead sort of the next 30, 40 years. Unfortunately, Brazil, Russia, and India have still remained kind of resource type economies or processor type economies.
Okay.
Whereas China has really led the charge up on technology and manufacturing and become the manufacturing powerhouse of the world. And if you think of the construct, it was cheap Russian oil and gas, which was powering the German economy, which became the powerhouse of Europe. And it was cheap Chinese goods, which was powering the US consumption economy. And then they were sending all the surpluses they made back to the US to buy treasuries. So all the surpluses coming out of the oil exporting gas countries like Russia or Saudi and China was going back to finance the West and keeping interest rates low. I think that story is played out. So you're heading into an era where you are going to see higher inflation in the West. And maybe at some point currencies start tumbling.
Okay.
How we play out in this is something,
we have to find our own feet there.
We really have to catch up a lot.
Okay. Now, since you talked about the US and you talked about this one, the world has changed more in the last 2 years than it's changed in the last 20 years.
Yeah. And last month with Trump coming.
Yes, with Trump coming is going to change even more.
Absolutely.
Now, in the last 2 years, the most important developments were the Ukraine war and the war in the Middle East.
Right.
And both have the potential to bankrupt America on the one hand and cripple Europe on the other. What's your view on that?
No, I think bankrupting America is, I think, overstating the case.
Okay.
These both are actually unfinished agendas of the earlier decades. So, like when the British left Asia and they left Africa and they just drew up lines in the sand.
Yes.
They've left the unfinished problem of Israel and Palestine over there. I think the Israelis, every 12 years, they say we have to go and clean up. And prepare for a next generation. I think that's what's going on over there. What's happened there is horrific. But I'm told they already have a ceasefire drawn.
They have a ceasefire drawn, but before the ceasefire, they've already been bombing.
But well, I mean, Trump is clear that he earlier in the past also he was happy to put the consulate in Jerusalem and recognize that and so on. So he's clearly in the camp of the Israelis, and the Palestinians realize the rest of the Arab world hasn't really rallied around them. Iran has been shown to be with feet of clay. They haven't, with Hezbollah and Hamas and all that, which were their proxies, they haven't really managed to do anything to dent the Israeli might. So I think that war will play itself out. As far as the Ukraine situation is concerned, this is a legacy of the breakup of Soviet Union, when they were promised that NATO will not move an inch eastward.
Eastwards.
And I mean, at some level, you can't blame what has happened over there. It's a
It was
bit like
expected.
when he first went into Crimea in 2014 and say, I need access to the sea, and then you want the land border and so on. So it was a war waiting to happen. I think the West has just egged on Ukraine, foolishly beyond the point. They've run out of arms. If tomorrow China were to cross the Taiwan Straits, I don't know what the American arsenal is available to then ship to that part of the world.
Exactly.
So it may bankrupt them in terms of the armaments, but not in terms of money power, because they're still the reserve currency of the world.
In spite of having a $35 trillion debt.
So the world is financing them, and including India, right? We're very proud we have $700 billion of reserves, which they print in 3 months. So again, like I said, when this architecture of the world is coming apart at the seams, you realize that the Russians, the Saudis, and the Chinese are clearly not wanting to hold money anymore in US and in US treasuries. And the way the US weaponized the dollar and the SWIFT network when the Ukraine war broke out,
yes,
I think it sent shockwaves across all countries in the world that our money may not be our money anymore.
Correct.
And therefore, you've seen over the last 4-5 years how people have started diversifying both movement of money as well as store of value away from the dollar. It's very small, but at the margin, you see this happening where gold reserves, for example, for China, Russia, Saudi, India, have been rising at a tremendous pace, whereas the US, of course, is merely continuing its printing ways. The deficits they run are now absolutely crazy. I think they're running a 6% fiscal deficit.
Correct.
And I'm staggered with the number they have on the current account. So the bond markets have already signaled it, that even when the US Fed has cut rates, the bond rates have continued to be at 4.4%, even though the Fed is at 3%. So it's signaling there is a crisis coming. Having said that, the US is the cleanest dirty shirt in the West.
Okay.
So the crisis I would expect will come out from an economy like UK, for example, because their statistics, when you look at their fiscal balance and their current account balance, looks like a third world country now.
Yes.
And there's no manufacturing really left in the UK. With this non-dom taxation and all, they basically force people to leave the UK. So all the money coming there of the oligarchs and the Arabs to buy property in London and to keep their money safe over there, with the tax levels going up, and especially now with this Labour government there, I think that'll be the canary in the coal mine, that something blows over there. And like you saw the Asian crisis in the late 90s, I think you'll see a European crisis at some point. But debt levels, remember, it's not just UK, which is now, of course, out of the euro, but Greece and Spain, France, I mean, debt levels are absurd over there.
Very, very.
So there's something coming on the currency and debt market. This time it's going to come from there.
It's going to come from there. How do you see Germany? Germany was a powerhouse in Europe.
So Germany, unfortunately, again, they've
goofed up. They've goofed up.
So they shut down all their nuclear plants and coal plants, and they got completely dependent on gas supplies from Russia and completely at their mercy. And also now with the advent of the Chinese, who have come in with EV, their largest manufacturing is in automobiles, which is kind of finished. The chemical business has actually basically migrated to China as well. So Germany used to run on all their small enterprises, which used to support these large ones. So it's a structural issue in that country. And a lot of manufacturing, even if it stays in Europe, will move more to Eastern Europe than it would stay in Western Europe. So I think it's a difficult time for Europe.
So would you say that Germany and UK are the first to collapse?
Well, actually, no. So France, Italy, balance sheets are even worse than Germany. So Germany is the strongest.
Okay, Germany is the strongest, yes.
So they'll hold out the more, and they are more about sound money. But there is a crisis coming. So I would expect UK to be the first to blow. But I mean, they have friends across the ocean, and they might get bailed out. But I don't know what happens to Italy and France and Greece and Spain and the so-called PIGS countries.
Yes.
Let's see.
Actually, and the acronym was very, very apt.
Yeah.
Whoever coined it was brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay. When you look at China today, China is emerging as a huge power, both financially, even militarily. If you look at the number of technologies where they have surpassed the USA, the number is increasing day by day. Education is improving there. Now, with this kind of scenario, do you see tensions rising in this part of the world?
It's inevitable, right? In geopolitical terms, each time a new power comes to threaten the power which is the superpower of the time, which today is US, you tend to see wars breaking out. And it's been anticipated by everyone, including the US. So they're on record where the Pentagon says by 2027, the Chinese military power crosses that of the US. And again, in terms of how you fight wars, if you recall, in the Second World War, the British were focusing on their navy because that's how they won the First World War, whereas the Second World War moved to the Air Force.
Yes.
And the same way today, when we are focusing on what we can do with our Air Force or our aircraft carriers, it's stupid because with missiles and drones, you can basically take it out now.
And Iran has shown how that you can have very low-cost missiles, changing the equation completely.
Right. So, not actually, Israel did that to Iran, and they showed they have no air force. And Ukraine has been able to hold out also against Russia, and it's a wake-up call to India, which relies a lot on Russian armaments. So, even the demonstration that Russia did with this hypersonic missile going into Kiev, you don't need a nuclear weapon because the kinetic force of the hypersonic missile is enough to
blast everything,
to blast whatever you want. So on military front, in terms of sheer manpower and on technology and their ability to play in the cyberspace as well, China is far ahead, even to throw bodies. I think they've made peace with India on the Ladakh border and the other places, really gearing up to not have us on the wrong side of the table should tensions with the US escalate. Because they can't have so many open fronts.
Correct.
And India, of course, has been playing, how do you say, the neutral party here. Because it's not in our interest to spend resources on going to war with someone where we really don't have, honestly, I don't see why China has been threatening India because most of their population is facing the Pacific Ocean. And then there's a Himalaya,
border which separates both.
I don't see what the real issue they have. The war with India was, in my view, won in 1962 when they took Tibetan plateaus and they got control of the water over there. And water is what, the next war is going to be fought over everywhere in the world. But Chinese are sitting on top of the water table of the world. So they have water. They've already made their friends on energy. They're far ahead of the world on renewable energy. As you said, on critical technologies, industries of the future like EV, robotics, even biotech, quite far ahead. American Chips Act also actually tried to prevent them from getting access to chips.
Did work.
They've made their own chips. So I don't think it's easy to keep them down. You can keep them fenced in. But the fact of the matter is, kind of all supply chains of the world end up in China. It's very fashionable to say China plus one. But even if you want to do that, it's still 10 years away. Because you will build the factories, then you will build the scale, and then you will build the cost to get there. And what Mr. Trump is, of course, trying is, the classic negotiation ploy that I'll put tariffs up and make it costly, so therefore someone can come and produce here or near shore and so on and so forth. But it's all very inflationary. Now, having inflation at a time when your budget is out of whack and the market is not in a mood to provide you cheap financing, it blows all, calculations out of the water. And at the same time, Mr. Trump also wants to deport the Mexicans who are coming and working there.
Yeah, so
you get labor inflation and you get goods inflation.
Yes.
And meanwhile, Mr. Musk and Ramaswamy will go and take an axe to government spending, which will be a deflationary shock. So it could be a very interesting scenario what plays out.
Okay. The other thing which I thought was very interesting is China, to mitigate its water problems, has already signed a pact in 2016 with Russia to tap water from Lake Baikal, which is the world's largest freshwater reserves. Do you think Russia and China will get closer even on the waterfront?
See, for Russia, if you realize when this war broke out and they were cut off from the West, it became a very large export market because their consumption was still going on. And Putin had pretty much insulated his economy from the West. And I mean, really, the sanctions have not made a material difference to them. But at the same time, I think if you're sitting in Putin's shoes, you realize I cannot be inside the pocket of the Chinese. Therefore, he's kept his friendship going with the Indians. So it's like a three-way lock in Asia between the three great powers, where you have two friends and one kind of not so friendly country, and you keep that sort of equation going as long as you can. Because again, like I said, there's no basic fight between these countries. It's a fight of egos where number one feels number two is coming to be my equal and let me, show him his place. And number two feels number three, in this case, China and India, that number three should not, feel he can come up and equal me and let me show him his place as well. And it's that sort of political games going on.
What happened?
In theory, if China and India had worked together with
enormously, yes,
it would have been an Asian century.
Yes.
There was no need to waste money on military spend. There's ample water, there's ample agriculture, there's ample manufacturing goods, there's ample consumers, which was around for everyone. So, I mean, as you say, investors can be optimistic and hopeful, but we have to deal with realities the way they are.
Okay. At present, there are two versions about Israel. And one version is that Israel has been so badly hit. Its exports have stopped. All its ports have been damaged completely. Nevatim, which used to be the home for the F-34s,
Right.
is completely destroyed. And now you have a situation where Israelis are leaving Israel. So when the brightest leave, you have a crisis internally because you don't have such bright people.
I think you underestimate the resilience of the Israelis.
Okay.
This is a country which came out of the Holocaust.
It came out of the Holocaust. Yes.
And they're very, very powerful in the US. All the
yes,
sit in the US.
They control the US.
Yeah,
they control the US.
You'll be surprised
yes.
at how fast Israel bounces back.
You think
I don't think they're as devastated as you say in the first place. In fact, the shoe's on the other foot that they have the Arab world kind of holding back. Otherwise, in theory, they're surrounded by everyone. The Arabs could have come and taken them out. They've not done anything of that sort. The friendship with Saudi and UAE, which is what sparked this war, I think, in the first place, was to prevent that peace treaty from being signed. And we are a player as well, right? Because we put the Middle East corridor through UAE and Saudi and Israel going into Europe.
Yep.
So we are very interested parties as well that there should be peace over here. And it opens an alternative route for Indian exports. In fact, the famous book which William Dalrymple has just put out, The Golden Road, where he talks of the ancient trade routes between Rome and India passing through Arabia, is something that ought to be revived.
Yes. So effectively, who are the winners and losers in the next, let's say, 20, 30 years?
No, it's undeniable that the way the Western construct has been is not going to last. The world will change. It will become a lot more multilateral than a bipolar superpower world.
Unipole, actually.
Yeah, I mean, the US, of course, became unipole post the collapse of the Soviet Union. But now it's I would call it still bipolar because China is very, very powerful. I don't think it should be underestimated. And we shouldn't rely on the Western media to tell us that there's a crisis in China. They have a property bust. They have a growth issue. But having said that, the population is declining.
In spite of that, they made a $1 trillion, almost $1 trillion.
The surplus, yeah.
Oh, surplus.
Their surpluses have gone through the roof.
Amazing.
Absolutely. So it's a very, very powerful country. They think very strategically and very, very long term. So like you said, for whether it's for minerals or for energy or for water or for military or even stopping social evils like too much games, all the stuff which people are doing with coaching classes and so on. So their eyes are on everything. Typically, centrally planned economies don't last for long because they don't allow market forces to take place. But it takes 10, 15 years to play out. So while Xi Jinping had inherited an economy which was taking off, the lid he has put on it, I think, is going to make it a tinderbox. And let's see how that plays out over the next 10 years when he's still in power. But if they can make this transition, it's undeniable that the infrastructure, the capabilities that they have built,
it's an incredible country,
are going to see them through. India, fortunately, also is in a good state in terms of good leadership and a break from the past. But we have a lot to do, as I said. So moving from a resource exporter or a processor of whether it's IT or pharma or manufacturing for somebody else, we will hopefully transition in the next 15, 20 years to building our own IP, building our own products, building our own brands. Because as a country goes from number 5 in the world to number 3, inevitably our brands and our products will have to travel outside. And if we don't do it, we won't make it over there. And you have to lift these masses because we are still like, they say, a very Mughal type empire where the elite are consuming and the billion is actually working for this elite who are exporting a bit out to the West. So we need a fundamental shift in our economy as well. But I think we'll talk about it.
We'll talk about it shortly, yes. But thank you very much, Manish. It's good to understand your perspective of the world.
Right.
And in these confusing times, it's good to have a voice of sanity.
Thanks for having me, Bhaskar.
Thank you. Pleasure. Thanks.